Drive past Thurley Airfield in Bedfordshire on the right afternoon and you won't see planes. You'll see cars. Thousands of them. Brand new, never driven, lined up in perfect rows on old wartime runways that haven't seen a bomber take off since the 1940s. Same story at Avonmouth Docks near Bristol. Same story at half a dozen other airfields and ports scattered across England you've probably driven past without knowing what was parked behind the fence. These aren't scrapped cars. They're not damaged, not recalled, not waiting for parts. They're finished, ready to drive, sitting in fields because nobody's bought them yet. Right now, across the UK, dealer forecourts are holding roughly £27 billion worth of unsold stock. 27 billion. That figure is up 16% in a single year, according to industry accountants who track this sort of thing every quarter, and it now represents nearly 18% of the entire sector's turnover just sitting there, depreciating, doing nothing. So what's actually going on? Why is a country that still buys around 2 million new cars a year drowning in vehicles it can't shift? And what happens to a brand new Vauxhall or a brand new Kia that rolls off a transporter and then just waits? Stick around, because the answer involves government fines, a legal loophole most car buyers have never heard of, and a very quiet crisis that dealers don't like talking about on camera. Let's start with the part that sounds like a conspiracy theory but isn't. In April this year, the UK's zero-emission vehicle mandate required that 33% of every manufacturer's new car sales be fully electric, not hybrid, not electrified, electric. Miss that target and the penalty is £12,000 per petrol or diesel car sold over the limit, plus £15,000 per van. Those numbers were actually cut down from an even harsher scale that applied at the end of 2024, when the fine sat at £15,000 a car. Either way, we're talking about a fine so large it can wipe out the entire profit margin on a car in one stroke. Here's the twist. EV sales in 2025 landed at 23.4% of the market, nowhere near the 28% target that year required, let alone the 33% bar for this year. So manufacturers had a choice: pay the fines, which nobody wants to do, trade compliance credits with rivals who are overperforming, which costs money too, or simply throttle back how many petrol and diesel cars they let dealers sell. And that third option is exactly what's been happening. Dealers have told trade press they're being handed buffer stock, cars built, paid for, sitting on site, but rationed out slowly because the manufacturer has already burned through its legal quota of non-electric registrations for the year. You want that new Ford, that new Toyota, that new Volkswagen with a normal engine in it. The car might physically be 20 feet from the sales room door. It might not be released to you until the next reporting quarter opens. Now flip that around and look at what happens on the electric side. To hit those same EV targets, manufacturers spent more than £5 billion subsidising electric car prices in 2025 alone. That works out to roughly £11,000 of discount baked into the average price of every single battery electric vehicle sold that year. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, the industry's own trade body, called that level of subsidy unsustainable. You can't discount your way to compliance forever without the business underneath you buckling. So you end up with this strange, lopsided market. Electric cars discounted so heavily manufacturers are practically giving away the profit. Petrol and diesel cars held back, rationed, sometimes stacked in fields, because releasing them too fast triggers a fine. Two different products, two completely different sets of rules, both funneling toward the same result. Cars that exist, that are finished, that nobody's driving. There's a second reason for all this backed-up inventory, and it's less about government policy and more about how the industry has always worked behind the curtain. It's called pre-registration. And if you've never heard the term, you've probably still felt its effects without knowing it. Here's how it works. A dealer registers a car to themselves, not to a customer, to the dealership, or sometimes the manufacturer registers a batch directly. On paper, that car now has an owner. It counts toward that month's sales figures. It counts toward the quarterly targets that trigger bonus payments from the manufacturer down to the dealer network. The car itself never moves. It sits on the same patch of tarmac it was delivered to. But as far as the numbers are concerned, it's sold. Why would anyone do that? Because the bonuses dealers earn from manufacturers are often tied to volume targets, not actual retail sales to real customers. Hit the number, unlock the back-end payment, miss it by a handful of units, and that payment disappears. So towards the end of a sales month or the end of a quarter, you'll sometimes see a spike in registrations that has nothing to do with customers walking through the door and everything to do with a dealer principal trying to hit a target set by head office. The catch is that a pre-registered car is now, technically, a used car. It has a registered keeper. It's lost that brand new, zero owner's status the moment paperwork went through, even though the odometer might read 4 miles, the distance from the compound to the wash bay. Which means, when it finally does go up for sale, it can't be marketed as new. it has to be discounted, sometimes by several £1,000s, just to reflect the fact that it's technically pre-owned. That's actually good news if you're a canny buyer. A pre-registered car with delivery mileage and a proper discount is one of the best-kept secrets in UK car buying. But it's a symptom of a system straining to make its numbers work, and it adds yet another category of sold but not sold cars to a market that's already choking on inventory. Layer the ZEV mandate rationing and the pre-registration numbers game on top of each other, and you start to see why fields of brand new cars have become a normal sight rather than a strange one-off. This isn't new either. It's worth saying that UK dealers have quietly used old RAF airfields for vehicle storage going back decades, particularly during downturns. Upper Hayford near Bicester held thousands of cars during past slumps. Thurley has done the same. What's different now isn't the practice, it's the scale and the reason. It used to be a recession problem, a temporary crash in demand that dealers rode out until buyers came back. Today, it's a structural problem, built into the rules of the market itself. And here's a detail worth sitting with for a second. A brand new car isn't a static asset the second it's built. It's a depreciating one from the moment the factory gate closes behind it. Every month it sits unsold, its value edges down, its warranty clock quietly ticks forward, its tyres slowly develop flat spots from bearing the same weight in the same position for months on end. Batteries, and this matters even more for the EVs piling up in this same system, degrade slightly even sitting still. So the longer these cars sit in a field, waiting for a compliance quota to reset or a bonus target to be reached, the less they're actually worth by the time somebody finally drives one home. Its value evaporating in real time, in plain sight, on an old bomber runway in the English countryside. It also helps to see the UK's version of this story next to what's happening elsewhere, because unsold new cars aren't a purely British problem. They're a symptom showing up in slightly different forms wherever regulators are pushing electrification faster than buyers are ready to follow. Fact-checkers have had to repeatedly debunk viral images claiming to show millions of unsold cars dumped in a field, because plenty of those photos circulating online actually show working logistics hubs, ports mid-shipment, or storage sites in completely different countries, sometimes years out of date. The genuine version of this story doesn't need exaggeration. It's real, it's happening on actual UK airfields and dockyards right now, and the honest numbers, £27 billion of dealer stock, a mandate with fines running into 5 figures per car, a used EV market sliding 10% a year, are dramatic enough on their own without anyone needing to Photoshop a satellite image of a car park in Ohio and call it Bedfordshire. Walk the actual rows at a site like Thurley if you ever got the chance, and the strangeness of it hits you in a way statistics don't quite capture. Rank after rank of identical badges glinting under grey English sky, wing mirrors still wrapped in plastic film, delivery stickers curling at the corners in the wind, tyres slowly settling into flat spots from months of standing still on the same patch of old concrete runway. No engines running, no radios on, just silence, and the very faint smell of fresh vinyl and factory paint drifting off thousands of cars that have never once been driven anywhere except off the back of a transporter. It's less like a car park and more like a car dealership frozen in time, waiting for a signal from somewhere else entirely, a compliance report, a quota reset, a boardroom decision in another country, before a single one of them is allowed to move again. Go looking through the comments under videos that cover this topic and you'll notice 2 things people keep coming back to. First, disbelief. A lot of viewers genuinely didn't know this was happening and assumed a sold car on a dealer's books meant an actual person had bought it and driven it away. Second, and this comes up again and again, people asking the obvious question, why don't manufacturers just cut the price until the cars move? The honest answer is that they sort of do, just not evenly. EVs get slashed hard because the mandate rewards moving them. Petrol and diesel models get held back, rather than discounted, because the problem manufacturers are managing isn't demand, it's a legal ceiling on how many of those cars they're even allowed to register without a financial penalty attached. Cutting the price wouldn't fix that. The bottleneck isn't the customer walking away, it's the paperwork. So what actually happens to these cars in the long run? A few different things, depending on how long they sit. Some do eventually get released once a manufacturer's compliance numbers reset at the start of a new reporting period, and they go to dealers and get sold at what looks like a completely normal price, with buyers none the wiser about the months that car spent parked on an old runway. Some get pre-registered specifically to hit end-of-quarter targets, then resold as heavily discounted delivery mileage cars, which, again, if you know to look for them, can be a genuinely smart way to buy nearly new for meaningfully less money. Some get exported. It's not unheard of for surplus UK stock to be shipped to markets with looser emissions targets or stronger demand, effectively solving the manufacturer's compliance problem by making the car somebody else's country's issue. And in the worst cases, when a model simply isn't selling and storage costs start to outweigh what the car's actually worth, dealers eat the loss and offload stock at auction for a fraction of list price, which is where you'll sometimes see near-new cars go for prices that make absolutely no sense until you understand the backstory. Not every brand is feeling this the same way, and that's worth breaking down, because the pain isn't spread evenly across the industry. Take Vauxhall. Sales fell 22% last year, a much sharper drop than the roughly 6% decline seen across the wider UK market. Its parent company, Stellantis, posted a loss of more than £2 billion in the first half of last year alone, and blamed restructuring costs and cancelled programs after its previous chief executive departed under pressure. Vauxhall responded by telling its entire dealer network, over 300 dealers, that their franchise agreements were being reviewed, with some expected not to survive the cut. That's not a company that's thriving and just has a temporary parking problem. That's a brand actively shrinking its own footprint while trying to work out how many cars its remaining dealers can actually shift. Across the industry more broadly, manufacturers spent roughly £4 billion on discounting in a single recent year just trying to keep registrations moving, money that comes straight off the bottom line, month after month, because the alternative is even more unsold stock piling up behind the fence. Now think about where a lot of those discounted, mandate-driven EVs eventually end up, the used market, because that's where the second half of this story really bites. A huge wave of electric cars came into the country between 2022 and 2024, through salary sacrifice schemes and corporate leasing. Company car drivers picked an EV, ran it for a standard 3-year contract, handed it back. Multiply that by tens of thousands of drivers who all signed up around the same time, and you get a wave of nearly identical, low-mileage used EVs hitting dealer forecourts all at once in 2025 and into this year. Basic supply and demand takes over from there. Too many of the same car, arriving at the same time, chasing too few buyers, and used EV values have fallen roughly 10% year-on-year as a result. Most industry leaders, well over half surveyed recently, expect that slide to continue through the rest of this year. Newer electric models keep arriving with better range and faster charging, which makes a 3-year-old EV feel outdated in a way a 3-year-old petrol car never quite does. So you end up with unsold new cars stacking up on one side of the market because of registration limits, and a glut of barely used EVs losing value fast on the other side, and dealers squeezed from both directions at once. Picture a dealership on the edge of a mid-sized English town, call it a composite of 100 forecourts like it up and down the country, because this is the kind of situation playing out at plenty of dealer groups right now, not just one. The sales manager there has a spreadsheet open every Monday morning that tracks 2 numbers nobody outside the trade ever thinks about: how many petrol cars the manufacturer will actually let in register this quarter, and how many electric cars he still needs to move to hit the bonus threshold that keeps his branch profitable. A customer walks in wanting a straightforward, mid-range hatchback with a normal engine, cash in hand, ready to buy today. And the honest answer, more often than that customer would ever expect, is not this month. Not because the car isn't sitting right there on the forecourt, but because releasing it would tip the dealership over its non-electric quota and trigger a fine that eats the entire month's margin. Meanwhile, the same dealer is practically begging people to test drive the electric model parked 2 spaces over, because every one he sells drags his numbers back into the safe zone. It's a strange kind of selling, where the thing in shortest supply is permission, not metal. There's an uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this. The ZEV mandate exists for a genuinely good reason: cutting emissions, pushing the country toward cleaner transport, hitting climate targets that matter well beyond any one industry's balance sheet. Nobody sensible is arguing the goal is wrong. But the mechanism forcing it through, hard registration caps enforced with painful fines, has created exactly the kind of strange, wasteful side effect that regulations sometimes produce when the market underneath them hasn't caught up to the pace the rule demands. Buyers aren't switching to electric fast enough to hit the targets on their own, so the industry is bending itself sideways to hit them anyway, and cars are the thing getting stuck in the gears. It also says something about how thin the line really is between a car being sold and a car actually belonging to someone. We tend to think of a sale as a clean, simple moment. Money changes hands, keys get handed over, done. But an enormous amount of the car industry runs on numbers that look like sales without a single customer involved. Registrations logged to hit a bonus, stock parked to dodge a fine, paperwork moving faster than metal. The car itself, sitting exactly where it was dropped off, waiting for the moment when the rules finally let someone drive it away for real. Next time you're behind an old airfield fence, or you pass a stretch of dockland stacked 3 rows deep with vehicles under plastic wrap, you'll know what you're actually looking at. Not abandoned cars, not scrapped cars. Just brand new cars, caught in the gap between what the rulebook says a manufacturer is allowed to sell and what an actual customer is ready to buy, quietly losing value, 1 month at a time, until the numbers finally line up and somebody, somewhere, gets to drive one home. If you've ever bought a pre-registered or delivery mileage car and got a great deal out of it, or if you've spotted one of these storage fields yourself, drop it in the comments. It's one of those things you only notice once you know to look for it. And if this kind of behind-the-scenes look at how the car industry actually works is something you're into, stick around, because there's a lot more of it where this came from.